This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. He was once a rising star in the Republican Party, spoken of as a possible vice presidential candidate at one point, and one day, who knows? Now, Bob McDonnell's political career and his life are in tatters. McDonnell and his wife are convicted this afternoon, were convicted on multiple corruption and obstruction counts, ending a dramatic fall from grace for what once appeared to be the perfect public couple. Correspondent Molly Henneberg has tonight's top story.
Mobbed by media cameras, Bob McDonnell, the first governor of Virginia to be convicted of a felony, left the courthouse today after the jury found him guilty on 11 counts of corruption.
My trust remains in the Lord.
McDonnell and his wife Maureen, convicted on 9 charges, wept as the verdict was read. The prosecution team, while successful in court, still called it a, quote, difficult day.
Public service frequently requires sacrifice and almost always requires financial sacrifice. When public officials turn to financial gain in exchange for official acts, we have little choice but to prosecute the case.
McDonnell, once considered a possible Republican vice presidential running mate for Mitt Romney in 2012, was convicted, along with his wife, of accepting more than $165,000 in loans and gifts from Virginia businessman Johnny Williams in exchange for a special promotion of one of Williams' company's products. Here's Hank Asbill, Bob McDonnell's attorney, after leaving the courtroom.
Obviously very disappointed that we couldn't bring this home for our client today, and we will appeal.
Legal experts said the judge's instructions to the jury, specifically his definition of what constitutes an official act by a public official, may form part of the defense's appeal.
By the judge giving the jurors a very broad ruling of what it means to be acting in your official capacity, he makes the prosecutor's job much easier in proving their case beyond a reasonable doubt that, in fact, he accepted these gifts in his capacity as the governor.
And not as a friend, Idala says. Sentencing is set for January 6th. Political analysts say McDonnell's conviction is a cautionary tale for politicians.
There's a national lesson here. Just because you're a star politically, just because your star is rising, doesn't mean that you have a blank check to do anything.
There were media reports earlier this year that McDonnell was offered a plea deal, calling for him to plead guilty to 1 felony fraud charge, and his wife would not have had to face any charges. McDonnell reportedly rejected the deal. Today, Sabato called it a, quote, horrible mistake. Brett?
Molly, thank you. Well, what do you think of the verdicts? Let me know at facebook.com/BrettBaerSR or on Twitter @BrettBaer. You can use the hashtag special report. The Obama Justice Department is opening a second investigation in the wake of the police shooting of an unarmed African-American man last month in suburban St. Louis. Correspondent Shannon Bream reports on the federal double play.
Today, the Justice Department launched yet another investigation in Ferguson, Missouri, following the shooting death of an unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown, by a white police officer. The new probe will look into the patterns and practices of the Ferguson Police Department for any evidence of racial bias or discrimination.
In meetings, as well as in listening sessions, as well as informal conversations, people consistently express concerns stemming from specific alleged incidents, from general policing practices, and from the lack of diversity on the Ferguson police force.
A justification that only sparked more questions.
I mean, it just sounds like when we talked to people and we read some stuff, but what specifically, I mean, there are cases that specifically predicated the opening of this?
Well, you seem a little dismissive there. It's like when you say we read a lot of stuff. I mean, that's kind of what we do, you know.
Holder went on to say that there are public records and documentation backing the anecdotal claims. The Justice Department says it has launched twice as many similar investigations into police departments in the last 5 years as compared to the 5-year period previous to that. Just weeks ago, Holder responded to the characterization of the Civil Rights Division and himself as activists, saying, quote, I'd say I agree with you 1,000%, and I am proud of it.
It does raise questions about the focus of this department, what their priorities are, how much time and energy is sunk into those priorities.
Leaving some asking why the DOJ doesn't appear to be equally committed to investigations like the one into Fast and Furious, the gun-walking operation gone wrong. Holder remains in contempt of Congress for refusing to cooperate with the House Oversight Committee investigation into the matter. And today, GOP Congressman Jim Jordan sent Holder a letter citing what he calls the department's, quote, history of obstruction with respect to the investigation into the IRS targeting of conservative groups. Jordan cites the DOJ's unfulfilled requests, broken promises, refusal to turn over material subject to a subpoena or to appoint special counsel, concluding, quote, these actions significantly undercut your promise in May 2013 to conduct a thorough investigation of the IRS targeting.
Critics are also questioning why the Justice Department hasn't launched an investigation, for example, in Chicago, where a number of police-involved shootings have been in the headlines. Asked today, the head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division said simply, there is no open investigation regarding the Chicago Police Department. Brett.
Shannon, thank you. Speaking of which, while the feds may not be looking into the Chicago police shootings, people in Chicago are. A new lawsuit is bringing attention to what is being called blue on black violence. Correspondent Mike Tobin tells us what that means.
An unarmed black male killed in a scuffle with police. This time the officer is off duty, moonlighting as a security guard. Unlike Ferguson, the officer is black. An attorney for the family of Marlon Horton says the issue is not white and black. It is blue and black.
The police are on one side and unarmed African-American men are on the other. And these young African-American men are being killed in situations where we feel deadly force and the killing was unjustified and unnecessary.
Last September, Horton was attempting to get into an apartment building where Officer Kenneth Walker and Shaquilla Moore were working as security guards. Horton was drunk and his blood showed traces of ecstasy. He urinated on or near the security guard's vehicle. A discussion gave way to aggression. You can see Walker kick at Horton's knee. Moore eventually throws punches. Extensions are pulled out of her hair and the guns come out. A column blocks the view of what happened in the final moments when Walker makes the decision to shoot.
We don't know why they killed him. We don't know. We think that if he wasn't black, he would still be alive.
An officer had to fire at a violent male.
Horton initially survives, but no one renders aid, not even responding police officers. The Chicago police superintendent says the obligation is to call for help.
That officer was just involved in a life and death confrontation. Sometimes they're not thinking straight after those things happen. So, you know, what did the officer do? Did he call 911? Yes, he did.
However, a paramedic at the call center prompted Walker.
Wherever he's bleeding from, keep him calm and help is on the way with us.
He does nothing.
And if that had been done during the 5 or 6 minutes it takes for the ambulance to get there, it is possible, and we will determine whether that could have saved Marlon Horton's life.
The Independent Police Review Authority says in the first quarter of this year there were 17 police-involved shootings in Chicago. Looking back to 2009, the targets of those shootings in Chicago are overwhelmingly black, but what's not included in the statistics is a tally of how many of those cases warranted deadly force. Brett?
Mike Tobin in Chicago. Mike, thank you. NATO leaders are tonight grappling with what, if any, role the alliance has in containing the ISIS terror threat. President Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron are pushing for an international response. But with Russia breathing down the NATO neck in Ukraine, taking on another long-term foe could be a tough sell. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry is traveling with the president and reports tonight from Wales.
A NATO summit billed as the most consequential in years opened with more talk about ending combat operations in Afghanistan and pushing back on Russian President Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. Yet President Obama was late to an afternoon session on Ukraine, in part because he was huddling with King Abdullah of Jordan as he tries to build an international coalition against ISIS, a symbol of how the terror threat vaulted to the top of the agenda, already crowded with crises at this summit hosted by British Prime Minister David Cameron.
It is absolutely clear that NATO is as vital to our future as it has been in our past. Russian troops are illegally in Ukraine. The extremist Islamist threat has risen in a new form in Iraq and Syria.
Cameron has been more forward-leaning with aggressive statements about ISIS and raising the terror threat in the UK. The White House aides brushed that off as a sign there are more foreign fighters in the Mideast with British passports. What have we been ordering? Yet the Prime Minister and the President were awfully eager to showcase their chumminess as they visited a school together and tried to stress they're on the same page by insisting they will not be cowed by militants in a joint editorial in the Times of London. The leaders declaring, quote, "We will be more forthright in the defense of our values, not least because a world of greater freedom is a fundamental part of how we keep our people safe." Even as White House aides downplayed the President's claim ISIS could be a manageable problem.
How do you tell the families of James Foley and Stephen Sotloff this is a problem that can be managed?
Well, what the President said was we need to degrade and destroy this organization. In the immediate term, you're not going to eradicate a terrorist organization that has taken over parts of two countries without putting in place a coalition.
An increasing number of Democrats are raising questions about the President's approach. Senator Elizabeth Warren ducked a question from Yahoo's Katie Couric about whether she agrees with Democrat Dianne Feinstein the President has been too cautious.
I can tell you what I believe. What I believe is that we need to be working now, full speed ahead, with other countries to destroy ISIS. That should be our #1 priority.
And Democrat Jeanne Shaheen seemed to distance herself from the President after appearing with Vice President Biden at an event in New Hampshire yesterday.
They should know we will follow them to the gates of hell until they are brought to justice.
Shaheen, locked in a re-election battle with Republican Scott Brown, tweeted, quote, "Do not believe ISIL is manageable. Agree these terrorists must be chased to the gates of hell."
Now, you saw my interview there with Ben Rhodes, the President's Deputy National Security Advisor. I also pressed him on how concerned he is about the possibility of a terror attack on the anniversary of both the 9/11 and Benghazi attacks that's coming up. He said candidly that on the sidelines of this NATO summit, there have been a lot of conversations about all those foreign fighters from ISIS with Western passports. Brett?
Ed Henry traveling with the President at the NATO summit. Ed, thank you. Up next, NATO and Russia nose to nose over Ukraine. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in Atlanta, and a grand jury indictment for the father of a child who died in a hot car. Justin Ross Harris faces charges of malice and felony murder, cruelty to children, and several others. He insists he forgot his 22-month-old son was in the SUV. Fox 32 in Chicago, where hundreds of fast food workers blocked traffic, demanding their pay be increased to $15 an hour. Most make less than half of that. Similar scenes occurred in states all over the country today. And this is a live look at Portland, Oregon from Fox 12. Among the stories there, it turns out dogs really will eat just about anything. You may have seen this on the 5. A Portland family says it took its sick 3-year-old Great Dane to the vet, where doctors discovered and removed 43.5 socks from the dog's stomach. 43.5. One surgeon says she finds items of clothing inside dogs often, but this was a record breaker. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.